So welcome everyone to the Sunshine Dreams Socks Knit Along and Club. Today we are going to do tips and tricks and techniques and everything that you can possibly need in order to be able to make these socks. And we're hoping that if you've got socks in progress that you'll be willing to show them off, and we'll show you the ones that we personally are working on. Unfortunately, our designer could not join us today, but I want to give a shout out to her because this is a beautiful pattern and I've been really impressed with how nice it is to follow. Her charting is really good and her basically commentary throughout the pattern is very helpful. So I hope you're all finding the same things. We did come up with a list of things that we thought that would be helpful as you work through the pattern, and I have a few comments about things there. The one I'm going to begin with, as I cut off poor Amanda here.
Oh, that's fine.
The one I'm going to begin with is the issue of size. So this particular sock pattern is, of course, written for Socknado using a 2.5 millimeter needle. And what I noticed when I looked at the sizing based on the stitches and the gauge was that I was going to have a fit problem. So for me, I like a smaller sock because I have hockey sticks for feet. And so it's really easy to customize the size of these socks if the stitch count doesn't work for you by changing your needle size. So you can decrease the sock itself in terms of size by just going down one needle size. And that's what I've done for myself. So I'm making the smallest size on a 2.25 millimeter needle, and it's sizing it exactly the way that I need. So I have these skinny ankles and I have a weirdly skinny foot in places. And so this is now going to give me a really nice fit. So I'll be showing you my sock later on and comparing it to the original, and you'll be able to see the difference that just a change in needle size makes. So definitely changing your needle up or down in order to adjust sizing is really helpful. There's another place that you can adjust sizing on this sock, and I'm just going to switch cameras so that you can see what we're talking about, because Amanda made this very good observation at back wall, flipping to the camera down low. And when we look at this sock here, for some reason, this is flipping everything upside down today, which is super exciting for us here. You'll see that there's a nice stocking stitch section on each side of the sock. And that is a place where, if you're a little more experienced with socks, you can add or take away stitches. It's not going to affect any of the patterns on the socks. And when you decrease in your gusset, you'll be able to get rid of any stitches that you don't want in the foot. So you could customize the leg by making it larger or smaller, or you can customize the overall size by changing the stitches in that stocking stitch band. So that's the band that was used in terms of doing the other grading for the sizes for this sock. And you yourself can also tweak that if you want. So as we go through the construction of the sock, this will be a little bit more obvious in terms of how it's not going to actually affect the pattern at all. One of the nice things about this pattern is that it has a chart for the front of the sock, as we know if we've started, and a chart for the back, and then that leaves these side panels to be really, really customizable. I could have dropped the size on my sock by removing them, but personally I really like them, so I left them in. But this is the sock that I'm knitting, and you can see that, well, not really on that part, but you can see here that there's definitely a difference in the size of the sock just based on changing the size of the needle. So right at the beginning, I wanted to mention the sizing things about this sock because it's very flexible in terms of what you do, thanks to the way the designer has created the sock, which I thought was quite brilliant. So do you have any more thoughts on sizing, Amanda?
No, I mean, your thoughts kind of mirror what I was thinking as well. It's just, yeah, it's such a flexible pattern. I feel like at first you'd think maybe it wouldn't be because of the charting and all of that, but she allowed you some wiggle room with those side panels, and I think it's great that we're able to customize it because not everyone's foot is the same size or shape. So.
So that was the first thing that we wanted to address. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention right at the start of the pattern is that originally this pattern was written for magic loop or the use of flexi flips, which is 2 needles. And you'll still find a little bit of language in the pattern talking about that in terms of front needle, back needle. For our people who love DPNs, and I would say that we're evenly split here at the studio in terms of who likes to knit socks on DPNs versus flexi flips or magic loop, don't pay any attention to that. Just divide the stitches on your needles as you would normally. And there is a comment about that in the section on notes on page 2. So it does say that you do not have to use magic loop or flexi flips, which is a 2-needle way of working. So don't worry about that. I have had 1 or 2 people who came in and were concerned about it, and it makes no difference to the working of this pattern because, again, the designer has you placing markers where the charts go, so it doesn't matter how the stitches are arranged on the needles when you're working the leg and the foot. There's just not an issue there, so please don't worry about that if you are a DPN user. So let's get to the next thing on here. We had wanted to adjust the sizing, and then the other thing that I wanted to adjust is, or to mention, is adjusting the sizing is related to gauge. And so if you're a person who has an issue with socks blistering you, and I am one of those people, and in fact created Socknado to solve that issue, and it just occurred to me today. I've been doing stuff you guys missed. Anyway, I have feet that blister really easily. So what you will find is that if you have tighter stitches, so a tighter gauge, that you are less likely to have that sort of problem. So if you are a person who prefers a smoother inside to the sock, what you might want to do is, again, use that going down a needle size to tighten up on the gauge, and then you might want to move up a size in the sock to compensate for the change of needles. But that'll tighten up the stitches themselves, which is easier on a foot that is a little bit more of a princess. So literally Socknado was created because I have princess feet, and that's one of the considerations for me on a sock that has a looser gauge, is that I am more likely to blister, because I tell you, I just blister and blister and blister if there's something even slightly irregular around my foot. So that is another thing that you can do if the gauge is not suitable for your particular skin. So yeah, got that. So I think it's now on to talking about twisted rib.
Yes, so this sock pattern, she decided to use the twisted rib, though technically it's a half twisted rib, not a full twisted rib, but sometimes in patterns you'll see that term used for just as twisted rib, and that's usually what it means. There we go. So let's flip this over so it's the right side. So you can see here, those knit stitches are just a little bit tighter because you end up knitting through the back of the loop to cause it to twist. I couldn't find a sample that was just the 1x1 rib, but you can kind of see here. Not super good with this yarn.
Knit by the same person on the same needles, you can see the difference in the knit stitch and the ribbing. So you can see they're much tighter in the green sock than in the other sock. And so it definitely...
And it almost ends up looking kind of to me like a braid when you have it twisted. And I really like it because I find when I do ribbing on socks sometimes, over time, your ribbing will stretch quite a bit and just loosen. Whereas with the twisted rib, I don't get that issue as much. And I find it just looks tighter and neater over time. And so it's really, I mean, all you're doing is knitting into the back of the loop instead of the front. And it just, it makes it a nice kind of tidy look. And I'm assuming that's why she picked it for this pattern, just because it matches the other stitches and
and you can
gauge.
It feeds down nicely into the lace there. So that's definitely another reason why you might make that design choice.
You see it a lot lately. I've seen it on some sweater patterns for cuffs and collars and everything. But I think it's one of my favorite ways to do ribbing now, just because it looks so much cleaner. And just in case you've not done a twisted rib and you're waiting to start on casting on your sock, the purling is done normally in this. So you're knitting through the back of the stitch when you're doing the knit stitch, and you're doing the purl stitch completely normally. So it's a very easy thing to do in terms of technique. So I'm seeing definitely some socks that have been started with people here today, but this is being recorded for posterity. So if somebody's about to cast on, there's a neat reason why it's done, and it definitely tidies up the top of the sock. The other thing that it can do is, like Amanda mentioned, it reduces that stretching out factor. So again, you can adjust the fit a little bit at the top of the sock by whether you do the twisted rib or not. So if you have a calf that flared really sharply, then what you might want to do is actually go with a regular 1x1 ribbing, which will stretch a little more. But for the look of it and the structure of it, it's definitely a fun choice. Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing that you can do with this sock is that the sock is written to have an inch of ribbing. You can see the one laid right underneath that has a longer rib. You can change that. There is enough yarn in your skeins of yarn for this sock to be able to change the depth of the ribbing. So if you like a longer, deeper ribbing, go for it. You will
Mhm.
have no problems whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. The other thing is there is information in the pattern. So the sock leg is about 6 inches long. There is information in the pattern so that you can lengthen your spool. This is really wild going upside down here. Anyway, brand new fancy camera, gets much better resolution, focuses on your hands no matter where they are, and has flipped everything upside down, but we'll get that solved. Anyway, so if you wanted to lengthen your sock, then you can definitely do that. And she gives you places in the lace chart itself where you can stop after you've put some extra length in. So instead of just repeating the entire chart to lengthen the leg, you can repeat part of the chart, and she gives you good information on that.
Yeah, I think it's like after every five, something like it's wherever you work these kind of cables.
Yeah, the instructions on where you can go to if you want to lengthen the leg are on the bottom of page 4. So they're just under where you get started on working the leg itself. So this is the kind of thing that personally I tend to read right past in patterns. So we did want to bring this to everyone's attention, that you can modify the length. And again, skeins of sock NATO, which is what this is designed in, definitely have the yardage to allow you to be able to lengthen your leg some without worrying about running out. This is always, of course, a concern, but these are quite a large pair of socks that are knit here, and there was quite a bit of yarn left at the end. So that was one of the things that was important about designing with this yarn.
Yep.
Alrighty, so next, time to show you guys how to work a bunch of the stitches in here, because some of these you may have run into before and some you may not. Here's our swatch.
Yes.
Take away our sock, and what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate each one of the stitches that's used in the lace so that you have a better feel for how they're worked. We can trade off.
No, I'm just saying you can slide over a bit so you're not reaching. There you go.
This is an interesting experiment, trying it not squished together, being very, very friendly with each other in an office that is meant for one person, not two.
Well, one thing I just wanted to say too about these stitches is I really liked that it gives you the idea and the look of these cables without having to futz around with a cable needle. Because I think some people do get kind of intimidated by cables because it's like, oh, I have to shuffle things around and move things back and forth, all of that. But the fact that she's able to get this beautiful cabled kind of lace going on without having to do that, I really like these stitches. I found this sock really fun to knit.
Yeah, this made my heart really happy, and I have far too many whips on the go, but I will admit that I got totally hooked by this sock as soon as I cast it on.
It's really fun.
It was very hard to make myself stop at the heel flap pickup so that we could demonstrate.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the tips that we have for you in terms of working some of the stitches in this pattern is a pointy needle. If you can get a set of pointy needles to make the sock, that is extremely helpful. If you don't have pointy needles to make the socks, so for example, your DPNs aren't sharp, or you might have flexi flips and you feel they aren't sharp enough, or whatever you're using for magic loop, you can always get one nice sharp pointy needle from another set and use that to actually work the stitch. As long as you make sure that the stitch goes onto the needle that is going to be used for the rest of the sock, once it's done, you can always cheat. So I'll show you what I mean with this swatch. I just realized that I didn't get past the ribbing on the edge.
It's going to be upside down.
I know, but oh, that is a problem.
Lay on the table.
I don't know why it's doing that. I think it's actually going to be okay because you can still see what I'm doing with the needles. I just have to make sure to get them in the center of the screen, which is kind of crazy. I tell you, new technology. All right, so the first stitch in here that is pretty obvious to anybody, wow, trying to landmark, that's pretty obvious to anybody who's been doing knitting for a long time is a knit 3 together. And for those who are less practiced at it, it is literally just taking 3 stitches and knitting them together at one time. So that will give you a decrease that gets rid of 2 stitches, and it is a right-leaning decrease if that matters, but it's one of the ways to decrease quite quickly and have an actual direction. And it's used in this sock because the lace moves in S curves, and so doing the decreases in different directions will allow you to see that. Now, in this case, if this was too hard to work at this point, if you couldn't get your needle in, this is where you can take a smaller needle. Good Lord, I just ripped that right out of the stitches. Way to go. Okay, so we just leave that there. We can take a smaller needle like I'm doing here and actually work the stitch. Okay, that's not going so well for me, is it? Stop it. There you go. Yeah, so I got my stitch worked. Now it's on my needle. What I can do is I can make that stitch a bit looser, and then I can just slide it purlwise onto the needle that is the working needle, and then just snug it up to fit that needle. What makes the size of the stitches is the size of the needle that is on the right-hand side. So the other option would be you could transfer some stitches off there on the left, work them, like transfer onto a smaller needle, work them, and then so on. But I found it was easier just to take a smaller needle, work the one stitch, and then I was fine. So let's do that knit 3 together with thicker needles. What I do is I get my forefinger on there and I hold those little rascals so that they are not able to slip off, and then work my stitch. And I'll actually push that needle through with my fingers so that those stitches don't bob off. So there's our knit 3 together, done both with a separate needle and with the same one. And I'm just going to work that again because sometimes they can be a little bit hard to see. So I use my forefinger to keep those rascals on there, especially on the sock needles where I tend to be a fairly tight knitter. This is a trick that I use all the time, and I don't try to push this needle all the way through. And then I will just guide that through with my finger, because that will give us a knit 3 together that behaved itself without being rude. And like I say, however it comes off, tight or loose, you can then retension it on the right-hand needle and move on. So any additional thoughts about knit 3 togethers?
I think that covers it.
Yeah, I did find that because I am a fairly tight knitter with the smaller needles, that tip with the finger really does help. If you've got super sharp needles, be careful because you could stab your finger. And I know that the Haya version of Flexi Flips can be extremely sharp, and boy, oh boy, you can puncture yourself with that. All right, you want to demonstrate the SSSK?
SSSK.
So an SSSK is exactly like a regular SSK. It's just adding one extra stitch in.
So
what we do to do this stitch is we're going to slip each stitch of 3 knitwise. So when you put the needle in, you're going to put it into the stitch as if to knit instead of slipping it purlwise. And what that does is it turns the stitch on the needle.
You can see it's kind of twisted.
Yeah. And by turning them like that, what this does is it turns them so that they lie flat, leaning to the left. Once you have done the 3 slips knitwise, then what you're going to do is transfer those stitches back to the left needle.
Slide
slips them back.
down.
And then you're going to take your right-hand needle and put it through the back of all 3 stitches and knit them.
And this is where it can get kind of tricky, just like the knit 3 together.
And again, if desperate, then what I will do is I will take that smaller needle. And so sometimes I have like a 2mm steel DPN that I'll use for that sort of thing.
Yeah. And then you can see here, if I go a bit closer, you can see how the knit 3 together and then the slip, knit lean opposite directions.
Yeah. So let's do another one just so that we have that clear and easy to follow.
So we got the slip 1 knitwise, slip 2, slip 3, and then we slip them back over. And then in through the back. And I sometimes will kind of pull on them a little bit just to get a little bit more give, because it can be very tight sometimes.
So one of the reasons, by the way, that we're swapping back and forth on demonstrating these is because I am a thrower and Amanda is a
picker.
Sounds
all like, funny.
That could have gone wrong.
Yes. Continental versus English, I guess, is the technical term. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, there you go.
Alrighty, so the next stitch in this list, and we're going through these at a pretty good rate here.
Yeah.
Is something called a twisted knit 2 together. So a twisted knit 2 together is kind of an interesting one. You don't see it used very often, but again, it helps the stitches to lie in a direction that makes the stitches flow in lace. So the way that you work the twisted knit 2 together is in your stitches and abbreviations on page 3 if you need a reminder. So on this one, you slip 1 stitch purlwise.
Yep.
Slip a 2nd stitch purlwise, and then you're going to pass the 1st stitch, which is actually the 2nd stitch that you slipped, back to the left-hand needle by inserting the tip of the left-hand needle into the stitch from right to left to twist it.
So you kind of go in that way.
Yeah. So that'll twist that stitch on the needle,
So you
and
can
then you
see.
slip the other one back to the left-hand needle in a purlwise method, and then you're going to knit the two together. Now there is a trick that I've found, because again, on sock needles, there's a thing that can happen, and that's where the stitch that you twisted can get super tight, and you can see that. Hopefully you can see that compared to the others, that one's a bit tight. So I found in the sock, I was having a little bit of difficulty with that. So before you slip the second stitch back, take the needle tip and give that one that's twisted a tug to loosen it up. And then it's much, much easier to do the knit two together from that point. So definitely give it a shot to try and tighten or loosen that up, because it makes it so much easier. So I found I was doing that with every single one of them. I'll let you finish that.
Yeah.
And we'll demonstrate that a couple of times.
Yeah.
So it's that twist that's necessary. And what that does is it puts the stitch that lies on top of the other in the knit two together in a different angle, and it just helps that lace to flow.
Yeah, let me do a normal knit two together, and then we can see, you kind of see better the difference.
You're drifting off the screen.
I know. It's because I'm also struggling right now. I'm having one of those moments.
English knitting for the win.
I know, I'm having one of those moments. But yeah, so this one is the regular.
Lift that up a little higher and see if we can get it.
I know the upside down is
Yeah.
not the best. So this is a regular knit two together, and then this is the twisted. So it's just, you can just see that one loop is just a little tighter than the other one. And that's, yeah, that's why she has you do it, so that it flows better with the cabling.
Absolutely. So for the people who are twisting both legs, will that make a difference in the end? So we had the question in the chat of, I was twisting both legs, will that make a difference? It tightens it up a little more, so the stitch itself is going to stand out a little bit higher than it would if it wasn't twisted on both legs. I don't think visually it's going to make a huge difference. It just will give the stitch a little bit more definition, and it will pull it in a little bit tighter.
Let's see. Oh, it's harder to knit though. Holy.
Oh yeah, it's a beast.
Can barely get that needle in
for the win.
Yeah, I'm just like, oh goodness. Yeah, so like visually, I don't think.
Yeah, visually it's not a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to work, and that's sometimes with all these SSKs and twisty things, why you might not actually twist both of them.
Yeah.
We also have another comment in the chat saying my pattern says 2.25 millimeter needles. I'm just going to have a quick look at that.
Oh, yeah,
look at that. It says 2.25 millimeter needles. Well, I'm going off of an older draft of the pattern, which said 2.5 millimeter needles.
I also use 2.5, so you're not the only one.
Yes. So my apologies on that. And that's a really good catch for one of our wonderful watchers here. I actually switched down to 2.25 millimeter needles, and I'm still getting a much tighter sock than the original knitter. So this is one of these instances where the same needle will produce different size socks for different people. So in my case, I got the effect that I wanted on the 2.25 millimeter needle. To match the original gauge, I would have to go up a needle size. So that was an interesting observation. And it's kind of fun when Amanda and I both knit the same sock, because we will absolutely end up on different needle sizes as a result.
Always, yeah.
All right, yeah, it's kind of weird watching upside down. I am just going to do a thing and see if I can get that fixed.
Please hold.
You can chat about the pattern here, Amanda, while I see.
Yeah, I really like this pattern because I feel like it's a good intro to cables for people that haven't done them before. And I like it too because I find I've done a couple cabled socks before with the cable needle and all that jazz. And I found it wasn't as enjoyable as this because it just took longer, whereas this is pretty seamless because you're just doing these extra little, you know, knit through together, slip, knit, whatever's, that it gives the same effect without increasing the time needed to do it. Because I love cables, but man, do they take longer.
Okay, I'm going to let you chat, and I'm actually going to disappear here for a minute and see if our IT person can help us.
Get some tech help.
He's the one who set this up.
I know, he set it up upside down. Oh, well. You get my picture back so I know what I look like. Oh, come on, Zoom. Thank you for bearing with us. I mean, technology. Where are we? I guess, I don't know, maybe while we wait, does anyone have any questions about the pattern or anything like that that we haven't covered yet? We still have some other stuff we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the twisted slip knit, the C3, which the cluster 3. We're also going to go over some heel modifications you can do, modifying the toe, that kind of stuff. So if there's any other questions in the meantime,
Just go to the other software, Dan.
it's just at the bottom there.
This one right there.
Yeah.
Well, let's Zoom. Yeah.
This one.
There you go.
Yeah.
I also really like this pattern because I find you can do so many different colors with it. We've done it in some solids. Caroline did it in that's New Leaves or Soda Pop?
It's New Leaves.
New Leaves.
Yeah.
So it's got a little bit of variegation to it. You don't want to go too crazy with the colors because you're gonna lose some of that texture and that patterning.
Stop talking, Dan.
But it definitely lends itself to a lot of different fun kind of colors. I don't know if you'd want to go too speckly or anything, probably not. Maybe a light speckle would be fine. Don't mind Dan's arm.
This is Dan's cell phone.
Yeah. Trying to get this figured out, but
yeah, this is kind of weird because this camera hasn't done this before, so
yeah, who knows, right? It's, you think you have it figured out, and then
kind of like knitting socks. You just never know what's going to happen to you at times.
well, and you think you have it figured out, and then it decides to not do what it's supposed to.
Mhm.
Go back to
Zoom.
Zoom.
All right, there we go. Back to Zoom. Oh, let's see. I have a question about how to adjust the width of the foot. Okay, yeah, we didn't have that on our list, but that
Actually,
could be
it's kind of on our list,
kind of.
but that is an excellent question. So one of the ways that you can adjust the width with a sock that has a heel flap is that you can either decrease more stitches or decrease fewer stitches in order to change the width. So if you have a wider foot than you have ankle, which is really common, what you would do is, as the pattern tells you to, just decrease fewer stitches so that overall you have more in the foot. One of the things to consider is how is the toe shaped, and so you may want to do a little bit of mathing. And so if it's a normal wedge-shaped toe, you may need to do that by multiples of 4 stitches so that when you do the toe, the math works very nicely and easily. This is definitely distracting to be watching, but you know, you guys are like being really good sports about being a guinea pig. So if I wanted to make the foot smaller on a sock as well, this is where I would decrease more stitches to bring the overall stitch count down. If it's too much to go with the math of 4, so decreasing by more than 4, and that's too much, you only want it to go down 2, you can do that. And what you can do is customize your toe by just doing one set of the decreases on both sides of the toe, and this will become, we'll do the toe on here. You would just do one set of decreases instead of 4, that kind of thing. That didn't sound good to me either. So on each decrease row on the toe, and so what you could do is on one row just decrease 2, and it will not harm the look of the sock in any way, shape, or form. But you would want to do that by multiples of 2 in terms of changing the size, whether you're making it bigger or whether you're making it smaller. So there's a number of different cast-ons that work. There's one called, I'm sorry, I'm just watching the ceiling now. That is actually a variation of them and see a video of how to work them, or find written and hate watching videos. I'm like, just get on with it, and they spend a lot of time chatting. One of them that I do for socks is I actually do a version of the regular old twisted cast on, or long tail cast on rather, not twisted. And what I do is in between each of the stitches that I cast on, I space. So that means instead of pulling the yarn that's not the main working yarn, the tail, instead of pulling that tight so that it puts the stitches up against, you can leave a space there. So don't pull it tight and put your fingertip in there, and that'll space the cast on enough that you have lots of elasticity here now.
Oh, no.
You can also, wow, so distracting. You can also cast on with a long tail cast on over 2 needles. And there are knitters out there that absolutely hate that because it leaves a bit of a ruffled edge on a sock. But it's not actually a bad thing, in my opinion, to have a ruffled edge. It does give some extra ease, and I kind of like the look of it. So sometimes I will use that deliberately. There are other types of very strips, but those are the main ones that I use for socks myself, and they give quite a bit of ease. There's a couple of them like Jenny's surprisingly stretchy cast on that you might want to use, again, if you've got a really strong flare on your calf, and a lot of people do. So one of our knitters here at the studio, she has, it's like a beautiful V that comes right out from her ankle bones. And so for her, a really, really stretchy one like the Jenny version would be quite helpful there. Let's see what we've got here. So a tip about the center yarn over for DPN users. Yeah, I wanted to talk about yarn overs because there's a few places in this sock where there's an interesting conundrum about how the yarn over is done.
Yeah, just flip it over there, then it would be fine probably.
Sorry, there's chat going on here. So we're gonna turn the camera. I think that might be our solution.
Yeah, we're just gonna take it off and move
the camera. Wow, that is quite a perspective.
it. There we go.
Okay, problem solved.
We'll just have a camera in our face, but that's
I can live with that. One of the interesting things about these brand new fancy webcams that we bought is that you're supposed to be able to use a joystick to like turn them around and angle them in any way that you need. That doesn't necessarily always work.
we just
Sorry about that, guys.
That's all right. So I'm just going to go to the other software. Why don't you talk about yarn overs in terms of DPNs? And I am going to go and fix this.
I don't use.
Well, maybe our lady that has some ideas on this would like to actually unmute herself and give her tip. Yeah, it's all twisty. So I'll be doing that while we do other things.
There we go. For doing lace socks, I cannot use flexi flips. I need a very, very super pointy needle. So I use DPNs. And what I had discovered the first time I had done, so what row was that? Row 9 of the pattern where we had, because with where, okay, where's my camera now? With where the lace is, where my DPNs are, you end up with a purl, and you have yarn overs on both sides. So my very, very first one, you can see, like it. See, now I'm having camera issues. You can see that.
Spotlight Nicole here. I just realized, Nicole, that what's going to happen is that you're not being recorded until I spotlight you. There we go.
Okay, so there we go. Now, when you look at why isn't my camera behaving? If you look, you can see that my first set of yarn overs for that are huge. And then afterwards, they're not quite so bad. What I do is I don't, where I would be ending my DP, like you would do your knit, yarn over, and then you start on your next DPN. I don't do that yarn over. What I do is on the next round, I pick up the loop, and then I still get my hole. I still get my holes.
Yeah.
And that, but they're like I said, like that's the first one where I did the yarn over on the DPN and then went on to the next needle. But for the following ones, what I did was I picked up the strand on the next round to do the yarn and knit into it to do the yarn over, and it makes a much neater yarn over.
A really good tip.
Yeah, love that. So what we can do too is what we'll do is show a couple of tricks that I know about in terms of yarn overs around a purl stitch. But thank you so much for explaining that, Nicole. That was very, very helpful and we really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alrighty, I'm going to switch cameras because that did bring me to one of the things that I wanted to show you. Oh my goodness, look at that.
So much better.
Yeah.
There we go.
Not as zoomed in as before, but hey, I'll take it. I can lift my hands up. So when we come up to a pearl and we have to do a yarn over, I'm actually going to pause a moment. You guys have been so patient already that I'm just going to go and zoom this in because it's just, why not? Okay.
Yeah, that's a little bit easier to see.
Yeah. And so we're just going to fix that. There we go.
Yeah.
Now we should be zoomed in better. See, this is what happens when each other. Okay. So when we come up to a purl stitch, and the next stitch on the needle now is a purl stitch. When you do a normal knit yarn over, I guess it would help if I actually knit this stitch. When you do a yarn over in this direction, you have to get your yarn back to the front of the needle in order to be able to work the purl stitch. And that adds a bunch of length to your yarn over. There's a few different ways to solve it, but in this sock, getting a nice big hole there is quite decorative. So what you would do is, instead of just bringing, there's two things, okay? So you can just bring the yarn from the back of the needle and knit the purl, and that gives you a yarn over that's short. And then what you would do is your yarn over back over the needle. So if you do them like that, they're a little clunky looking. So you can see that it looks a little clunky on the needle, but it gives you two short yarn overs that will match in length. And then that way you've got equal sized holes. If you want them to show a little better, there's a sneaky little trick where you're still going to match that length. So you would do your yarn over as you would expect normally. Come back around to the front. Now that is a really long one. Purl your stitch. And then what you're going to do is wrap the yarn around your needle twice, in essence. And that gives you a yarn over on the other side that's going to match the length of the previous one. The only thing that's weird about it is that when you come back to it again, and I'm just going to slip the stitches over to this needle so you can see, the stitch will be mounted backwards on the needle. So all you have to do is, if you want to, turn it on the needle so it's oriented the way a normal yarn over would be, or what you can do is just knit through the back of it, which will then twist the stitch into the normal orientation. But it's a way of getting yourself a yarn over that's going to match. So I'm just going to show you both of those again. Too much yarn in my hands, creature of habit. Yeah, I know I'm moving around. It's like not too exciting to watch me pick them out anyway. So to do this as a shorter yarn over, what you're going to do is just go to purl, bringing the yarn across the needle. You'll get this weird little kind of diagonal, and that is a short yarn over. Take the needle to the back, but not around the needle. Take the yarn to the back, not around the needle, but over the needle when you go to knit. And that will give you two equal length yarn overs. They are short, so your hole won't be too big. If you'd like to do this with a nice big hole, so lace, quite often you want the larger hole because it just shows better. Then when you go to work your purl, you do the longer yarn over, wrapping it all the way around the needle, coming to the front to do the purl. And to do the knit, instead of bringing it over the needle the way one might normally do, you're going to bring it under the needle and around to give yourself a nice big wrap, and then you do your knit. This gives you two much larger holes, and they will be the same size, because it's really common when you're working around a purl stitch that the holes will be a different length because of the way that one does them. So what's often done is that you've done your purl in the way that you've done the yarn over before the purl in the way that I did. And then the next one that you go to do, the knit stitch, do you see how that is much shorter, doing it the way that one might normally expect to? Mm-hmm. So that will give you an uneven set of holes around that center purl stitch. So when I was working on my sock, I did the longer one each time I came to that purl stitch. And you can see how I've got nice big lace holes there that are the same size. So in each case where I've worked around the purl stitch, it's given me a nice big hole, except for this one. And I did that one the other way specifically so that you guys could see that you will get a difference in the holes. if you don't compensate for the length of the yarn running around the needle. So all the rest of them are the large holes, and then I have one that's a small one. And of course, it's going to glare at me the entire rest of the time I wear this sock, but it will be a nice fond memory of having worked on this sock for a purpose of showing you guys yarn overs. So that's something that's really interesting about yarn overs, is the path that the yarn takes needs to match on either side of a stitch in between them so that they give you the same size of lace hole. So you might want to play with that on a swatch if you've not encountered that before. And like I say too, you can actually customize lace patterns to some degree because you can choose what kind of a yarn over that you're going to use. And in older British patterns, you would see yarn over and yarn forward. And those are actually referring to the two different ways of wrapping your yarn around the needle to get that additional new stitch. So that's kind of a fun thing about it, in that you can play with that and you can pair them up and make them look nicer. Because see that one there that's just disappearing? That's the one with the smaller yarn over. And so in this case, I've made all the adjustments to make them all suit the same size.
I saw someone's question pop up. Where does this come into play in the pattern? And specifically, you mostly will see it where you have this kind of central purl stitch that is going down the chart, and you will occasionally have these yarn overs on either side. And so that's kind of what Caroline is kind of going over.
Yeah, so what could happen here is you could end up with those center ones either mismatch or smaller than the others. So this is why I want to have us think consciously about how we're wrapping the yarn with the yarn over so that you can then get the effect you want. But it is down that center spine of the chart where it's particularly important. So there's nowhere else in the pattern where it's really going to cause an issue.
Yeah.
If I hadn't paid any attention to it in these areas of the chart, for example, it wouldn't have mattered because they're not right up against a purled. And what happens is that when they're up against a purl stitch, that's where you have to move the yarn between the needles to get it to the front to work the purl. And that's what throws it off.
Does the pattern describe the technique you're doing now? No, I don't think it goes over that specifically, does it?
No, it doesn't. So this is kind of value added. As somebody who's knit lace for a very, very long time, this is the kind of thing that I've learned about, but you don't see designers talk about it very often. If you want to know more about it, Patty Lyons actually has addressed that issue and has mentioned about the issue of the purl stitch causing an uneven yarn overs. I know in my own patterns, I actually do describe that if it's an issue, but not very many designers do.
Yeah.
Now we have another question here. Would having all of the instep stitches on one needle solve the yarn over issue? It'll certainly make it easier. And a lot of people will work with 4 DPNs where one is the working needle and the stitches are held on 3. If I'm using DPNs for a sock that has lace on the front of it, absolutely, I'll put the instep stitches on one needle and then I have the back of the leg stitches on the other 2 DPNs. So you can absolutely do that. Sets often come with 5 needles because there are some people who might be knitting very large socks or have large number of stitches. And if you put them on 4 needles with a 5th needle as the working needle, then that just reduces the pull on the corners and you're less likely to get ladders. And can you please tell us what row on the pattern this comes into play? So the very first time that you'll run into it is on row 9, and then again on row 13, row 17, row 21, and row 25. So if you just look at that center dot in your chart there, I suddenly realized that was off camera again, then you'll see that there are places that have yarn overs, and that's where that will make a difference. I will also tell you that I give you permission to not worry about it. This is like, you know, sock knitting extra. And I knit many, many socks where I didn't pay any attention to that. And no one has ever come to me and said, your holes don't match.
Truthfully, I didn't pay attention to that and it looks fine on my socks. I mean, it's not as beautiful and big as Caroline's, but it's fine.
Well, and it's one of those things that as a lace knitter, I like to share with people because you really don't see it discussed much these days. If you're an older knitter, then you would have run into the yarn over versus the yarn forward. And then you'd be, what on earth is that? And in those days, like I say, patterns were actually written to take that into account, but you don't see it that much on modern patterns.
So I mean, this is I'm working on my second sock now and I didn't do it on mine. And like, you can see maybe a subtle difference between them. This side, you can see it my one yarn over is kind of funny looking, but
yeah, when
it'll
you're
be
not stretching
fine.
it, you can see it. And like I say, on my sock, you can see it, but it is not a dramatic, oh my God, this sock has failed.
If you forget to do it or whatever, it's not going to be.
It's just a bonus for having worked through our camera issues.
Exactly. There you get a little treat, some extra info.
Yes.
We need,
Okay,
we got twisted.
back to our
SSK.
stitches. So the next one that we wanted to talk about was the twisted SSK. And the interesting thing about a twisted SSK as written in this pattern is that there's actually nothing that's twisted. So that one, when I got to it, I was like, oh, twisted SSK, and how did the designer work that? And I read the instructions, which again are on your abbreviations and techniques, which would be on page 3. And in that one, far as I can tell, that is absolutely similar to how you would normally work it. So I normally work this stitch exactly the way that it's being mentioned here. So you're slipping the first stitch of a twisted SSK purlwise. This is actually a old, there was no such thing as an SSK when I grew up. I bet there were, but anyway. So you're slipping one stitch purlwise, you're knitting one, and you're passing the stitch over. So this is how the left leaning decrease was done when I was young, and that's when dinosaurs ruled the plains.
Yeah.
So it gives you the look of a left lean that lies nice and flat. If you are working SSKs in any other pattern and you want a flatter lying SSK, this is one way to do it.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why you might work an SSK differently is that the stitch needs to be oriented differently, or it might be that you need it to be a little bit tighter. And so the traditional slip, slip, knit the two together through the back loop will tighten them up a little bit. So it changes the look. But your twisted SSK is your traditional, I forget how exactly it's written. Sometimes it's SLK, PSSO, and it's a mouthful.
Oh yeah, that one's.
But it is an absolutely classic, simple stitch to work.
So I did two side by side. So this one was the one that they are calling a twisted SSK, and then this is a regular SSK.
So I did have somebody come into the studio and say, what is the twist in here? And I'm like, well, actually there isn't a twist in terms of you haven't had to remount a stitch on the needle like you did with the twisted or knit two together.
Yeah.
So we did want to point that out. It's actually super simple and nice to work.
It definitely threw me off when I was doing it the first time, because I was like, what? Like, this isn't twisted at all.
I would have just used the other abbreviation for it, but you know, there's as many different ways to write knitting patterns as there are designers. So that's one of the fun things.
So yeah, that one's nice and simple.
So then that takes us to the C3, which is a very interesting stitch. And I really like it in this sock because it mimics the look of a cable without actually being a cable.
Yes.
But there are some tips that we can share in terms of how to work that one.
Yeah, this is another one that benefits from a pointy needle. I noticed a big difference when I wasn't using my pointy needle, but all you're doing is you have your kind of your 3, and that is on the back. You'll be doing it on the back of the ankle, calf, whatever you want to call it.
And it's also on each border of the front motif there. So that gives a really nice little cable effect with that nice little diagonal of the stitch.
Yes. So all you're doing is you take the 3rd loop, pick it up, pass it over the other 2. And this is where it can get kind of tight.
And dropping it.
And then dropping it.
And then you've got 2 stitches that are pulled tight. And the next thing that you'll do is you'll knit one, you'll yarn over, and you'll knit one to complete the stitch. And I'm going to do the next one so that we see it English style.
Yes.
Amanda's very, very correct here that having a sharp needle is very, very helpful here. Another trick that I was using was, again, going to that 3rd stitch in, and before I tried pulling it over, I gave it a tug. And you see how that loosened that stitch up? So once you've loosened it up, then it's easier to pull it over the other 2 and drop it. Now, you might think you're going to have this great big loose stitch, but when you go to block it, that's going to snug up some. It does look slightly different from what Amanda's stitch looks like, but actually it gives you a really nice diagonal. So I give you complete permission to do that. And then the other thing that what I found is that I slipped one. I put the stitch sitting on top of the second one, put that back on, and then I only had to pull it from that point over one more. Now that looked a little bit weird and awkward, but when it was super tight, that was an easy way to go. I'm going to do that again because I think my hands drifted because I got excited. So again, what I did when my stitches were super tight on my sock was I slipped the first one, took the 3rd in the series and just pulled it over the 2nd stitch in the group. And then I held it with my finger. So I'm holding it. We got a little V, put this other one back on. Now I can grab it again and pull it over the 2nd one. So that really worked for me as well. And then of course, the third option is to get a smaller needle. Again, if you got a super pointy 2mm DPN, then you could definitely use that. And we're going to use my sock needle on the DK yarn to show you that. You can use the thinner needle. And again, use that forefinger to hold those stitches in place if you need to, but the thinner needle makes it super easy to get it off there as well. There are some brands of DPN too that are just super sharp. And I have a few sets of nice sharp DPNs exactly for this purpose. So if I'm doing something super complicated and the needles I'm working on aren't quite sharp enough for that stitch, that's something that I'll do. So out of the rows here of this C3, you can see the one where I gave the stitch a pull is the loosest. Let me bring that up. But when you block your sock, that's going to pretty much pull back in and it's going to look like the others. I will tell you honestly, that is probably to me the easiest way to deal with that issue because it was frustrating me a little bit at first because I was knitting a bit too tight for the stitch and it was frustrating. All right. So now we've gone through all of the various stitches in here. We have a few things to cover. We're going to go a bit over time because of the technical issues. This is a plain old normal regular heel flap sock, and that means that you can customize the depth of your heel. So when we look at my sock versus the original sock, what you're going to find is that my heel is longer. And the reason for this is because I have a really tall instep, and so you can lengthen the heel flap. All you want to do is make sure that you keep track of how many rows you did so you know how many to pick up along the side of the heel flap. If you did not keep track, what you can do is just count the large stitches on the slip rows because that will tell you how many pairs of rows you have. So in my case, instead of doing the 13 that I believe my size said to do, I did 17 because that gives me that little bit of extra length that I need in order to make the sock fit better. So once you've done your change on the heel, if you want, then you're going to do your turning of the heel, which is a normal back and forth short row method of turning the heel. And then you're going to pick up on your heel flap. You can't make the heel flap wider on this pattern because you'll run into the lace. But if you have an issue where you have an extremely narrow heel, you could actually reduce the number of stitches in your heel flap and just leave them with your instep stitches and just decrease down to the amount that you need later. So that is an option that you can do. That's kind of finicky. Normally, heel flaps aren't too bad in terms of width for adjusting for fit, but it is a possibility. And I want to point out too that the numbers of stitches in this heel flap will give you 2 rows of knitting on one side. So when you get that and you look at it and the 2 edges of your heel flap don't match, that's okay. This is how the pattern is written. It has an uneven number of stitches because of the way that the lace charts work. That's not going to affect anything because later on you'll never really notice it along the side of your heel flap. So when we look at both sides, it's really hard to see that this one is not exactly the same as this one. If that drove you nuts, you could always do something really wild and crazy, which is to cast that stitch off, do your heel flap, do your gusset, and then add, well, not decrease one less on that side, and then you'd have back to the right number of stitches. There's all sorts of weird things that'll happen for socks when that sort of thing bothers you. Once you've got your heel turned, you're going to pick up along the heel flap. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a refresher on picking up. So this one is ready to go. You have worked the entire set of decreases around the sock heel. You're ready to go and you're going to pick up. And where do you decide to pick up? The edge of the heel flap will roll in, and it's really common for people to try and pick up on the leg that's showing there. But what you want to do is unroll it and you're going to look for the face of the slipped stitch. So let's get this up nice and close. You're looking for those V's along the edge. The best way to pick up is not grabbing one leg of that because do you see the hole that this has created? It's going to leave holes along the rest of your heel flap. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your needle through both legs of that edge stitch, and then you're going to knit onto the next needle, and you've now picked up one stitch. So we have picked up one, then we're just going to go to the next one, and I'm just going to use the working needle here. I'm going to put it through the 2 legs of the next stitch, and I'm going to knit my stitch. Now, which one do you begin with? You will quickly learn if you've chosen the wrong legs, because if you choose the wrong legs, you're going to try and make a stitch into the same place that the last stitch on the needle lives. So you don't want that one. You want the next one in. There are concern sometimes in sock classes that will leave a hole there, and it will not. It's all going to snug up nicely when you come along and do your next row of knitting. So I'm just going to quickly pick this line up. Am I centered here or am I floating away again?
We're okay right now.
Excellent. So again, I'm going through both legs and I'm unrolling that so I can get to those stitches easily and go through both legs of them. Just for fun, I'm going to pick up a couple that are incorrect so that you can see the difference. Whoops. All right, well, you're going to be incorrect then. So when we look at those on the needle, you can see how this is pulling a couple of big holes there. And you can do that on purpose if you want. It actually gives you kind of a look of lace eyelets along the edge of a heel flap. So I've occasionally used that with a lace sock just because I like the look of it. So I'm trying to get down to the end of this here because there's a little bit of a tip that I want to give you to prevent a hole at the edge of the heel flap. So lots of people will just let a hole form there. They go back and later on they sew it in. And that kind of thing drives me nuts because I'm darned if I want to go back and sew shut a hole later on. Okay, you guys move down. All right, we got one more. So what causes a hole where you go from the heel flap to the instep stitches, ooh, you little rascals, is actually what's giving me that bit of trouble there. And so you see how it's pulled loose, particularly if there are yarn overs anywhere in the area or a change from a knit to a purl, you'll get this looseness at the corner there. So what you can do to solve that is that you can actually pick up some extra stitches in that corner. And the place that you would do those would be, you can do just one. You don't want to pick up the bar because again, look, I've got a hole. So what you're going to do is you're going to go one stitch down from the one on the needle there, and you can use that to create your stitch. And you can do that in two places on the sock, which gives you 2 extra stitches. But you see how it's filled in that hole? So I'm going to demonstrate that again, but you can pick up extra stitches in there. And then what you do when you're doing your decrease on your gusset is you just decrease down to the number that you actually need. I just dropped a stitch on my sock, which was a bit silly. Okay, so again, we have our big long gap here. We're not happy with that. So we're just going to pick up in the stitch below the one on the right-hand needle and knit that stitch. And we don't have to do 2 if we don't want to. We can do just 1. And again, it's filled in that hole a lot. So picking up an extra stitch in the row below the stitches on your needle, I do 2. I'll do 1 on this side and I'll do 1 on this side. We'll fill that hole in and you don't have to go back and sew it. If you're also a person who likes your socks to fit really snugly around your instep, speaking of somebody who does, then putting 2 in there just gives it a little bit more strength and you're going to get less of a chance of having a lot of stress there. So that was something I wanted to show you about that pickup, is go through both legs and then give yourself an extra stitch in the corner there, and that'll really help with that hole that forms normally on socks. And the reason it forms is because there is basically a square there and you need to fill that square in to make it round because the sock is knit round. Hopefully that made sense. All right, so the last thing that we wanted to do was to talk about grafting toes because we have had some people toe grafting. So Amanda has made a little sample toe, and she's going to show you grafting for your toe of your sock.
Yes.
So another name for this is Kitchener stitch, but we've basically moved away from the name Kitchener stitch for various and sundry reasons. So you will see it online under both the name Kitchener stitch or grafting. In Canada, we tend to prefer grafting.
Yeah, same thing, different name. But yeah, so this is the little tiny baby toe I made. But for grafting together, it's the same for a lot of different sock patterns. A lot of cuff down sock patterns, you'll end up grafting them together. There are some other toe types where you would just decrease down and then pull your yarn through and pull it snug, kind of like some hat patterns. But I find the fit on those aren't always as nice as having the nice kind of wedge toe that you get when you graft these together. But the main thing is that you're going to be going in through the stitches and pulling some off as you go, and that's what kind of snugs it all up and gets it all closed. I always start off first. I can't remember if it was Tin Can Knits that had this specific tutorial of where they kind of start off first. Before taking any stitches off, you'll go through the front one as if to purl without taking the stitch off, and go through the back as if to knit. And that kind of just gets you started and kind of closes up some of those gaps that you might get. And then you kind of just proceed forward. I always kind of have it's not a rhyme, but like some sort of thing going in my head as the front needle is always as if to knit, you pull it off, and then purl is kept on. Oops. Snagging on the back.
Nope, you're good.
I think I accidentally got
Oh, the
on
yarn
there.
itself.
Yeah, the yarn got snagged. So yeah, the like phrase I always have in my head is like knit off, purl on for the front needle, and then purl off, knit on for the back needle. So then the back needle would be purl off, purlwise off, and then knitwise keep on. You can kind of snug it up. I don't like to pull it too tight initially because I find it can make it kind of difficult. You can always tighten and pull harder once you're done. But then you just continue to do that. So it's the
Knit off.
purl on. Oops. I think I did take off a loop accidentally. Whatever. And then purl off. Knit on. Goodness sakes, my yarn is getting all over the place.
It's just because it's high twist.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I think I did mess up one of the loops, but it'll give you the look of them being kind of a seamless join.
Yeah, it actually creates the same path that a normal stitch will take through its partners, shall we call them, on each side. So it creates something that it will look very much like the rest of the knitting. You won't see it.
This one's kind of wonky because I messed up with that one loop, but here you can kind of see it carries through fairly seamlessly. But then yeah, purl off, knit on. That's why I'm got uneven amounts on here, because I thought I'd made an extra loop, but I hadn't. But in the end, yours will match up evenly.
Don't do what Amanda did.
Don't do what I did.
Most of what Amanda did.
It's the pressure of doing it.
I blame the technology.
But yeah, you end up with quite a nice finished toe on there. Yeah, and then once you get to the end, if you have a proper thing.
So with the final two stitches.
So those ones you will just take off.
Yeah.
There's no extra one to leave on. I pull through both of them. And then sometimes you'll find, goes out of the way. Sometimes you'll find that kind of last bit looks a little funky. What I end up doing is I'll kind of stretch out my toe. This is also where you can kind of stretch it out. Make sure your stitches aren't too tight on the toe.
Or too loose.
Or too loose. Yeah, if they're too loose, you can always give it an extra tug. It'll tighten up nicely. So when it has this kind of funky extra loop, what I will do is I kind of will stab my needle into it, kind of going over top and around, and then pull it to the inside. And it kind of just tucks it in.
It sews that little dog ear down.
Yeah. So then
there are ways to eliminate it by not doing the full grafting on the edge stitches. But the problem that I find with that is that creates a weak spot sometimes.
Yeah.
So I prefer to sew those little ends down. You're going to have to weave in the yarn on the inside of the toe anyway. So that's a way to just come back up if it's still sticking up.
Yeah.
And pull that down again.
Yeah. And then you get a nice little.
And as far as the one on the right, if you do get a little bit of a pook on the right, you can always bring the needle up from the inside and down again through that little point, and that again will just sew that down.
Exactly. You can just go like she said.
Yeah. So I weave in up to that point on the inside, sew that down, weave back to the other end, and then never ever cut my tail because apparently I am lazy.
I'll do it. Yeah, so then you can just do it that way, and then it kind of
Yeah.
makes it nice and even.
So that tidies it up, and there's lots and lots of videos and description online about doing this. And I think we can probably turn that camera off now. They can see us again.
Yes, we'll just have a camera in our face, but
Oh well, we can live with a camera in our face. Anyway, you can find lots of instructions on graphing online, but everyone will have their own opinions on what to do with those little dog ears. And a lot of the instructions, if you would prefer not to sew them down, will have how to deal with that there. Again, Patty Lyons is a good option. You will find a lot from, there's a lot of good tutorials on Pearl Soho, Tin Can Knits, and, you know, other really well-established groups like that. So those videos and written instructions are basically permanent. I will admit I like Pearl Soho a lot because, again, I don't want to watch a 5-minute video for a 2-minute thing. So I like the fact that they have a photo tutorial.
yeah.
And I use that quite often when there's something I don't remember. Nicole gave us one last bit of useful information, which is that Addy duets are a godsend for picking up gusset stitches, and I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So they're a funky little gadget that Addy has made, and I do have one myself right by my knitting box.
Oh yeah,
And it has,
so nice.
yeah, it has a hook on one end and a point on the other, and so you can actually use it like an additional extra knitting needle.
Yeah.
Let's spotlight Nicole because she is showing us her
There we go.
Addy duet.
So yeah,
So there's the hook end, and then it has a tip like a knitting needle on the other end. So that knitting needle tip is really useful. And of course, you can also use the hooked end as well.
yeah.
So quite a useful tool. And I will, in a crass commercial plug, mention that we do carry them because I really like them.
Yeah, they're nice.
Well, that's exactly where I got them. I actually have them in pairs. I use the crochet hook to go underneath the loops because on the first side I can use my working needle, but on the second side, for whatever reason, sometimes my working needle and the yarn are not on speaking terms that day. And this here, I can just basically, like with a crochet hook, and I leave them on there, and then the next time I come around, I knit them off.
Yeah, that's smart.
I like that.
There you go.
And then last year I used them for the sock that had the cuffed. Okay, my brain is not working. The one that had the folded over cuff for the socks.
Oh yeah.
And that where you had to pick up and that to rather than sewing them up later, I just picked them up as I went, so that way I'd have the nice stretch. And I used the duets for that.
Huh. Well, there you go.
One of the best investments I've made from you guys.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any questions before we let you get back to your sock knitting?
No, I'm
Look like no. I really appreciate everyone that watched putting up with our camera shenanigans. My IT person is going to be beating himself up, that's my husband, for a number of days. And what we're going to do when we post this video on YouTube is we will put some timestamps on so you can find the actual techniques and not so much of the now they're wrestling with their cameras again.
Yeah, might be able to edit it out. See.
Yeah, we have to cut some of that out too, depending on what we were saying, because at times we were actually saying useful things while my poor husband cursed the day that we ever asked him to move us out into the back of the studio. And by the way, for anyone who's curious, what's behind us is a whole bunch of storage racks of yarn, and the dye area is back behind that. So, you know, a little behind the scenes on our Socknado production.
Kind of cool background.
Yeah. Plus we have air conditioning, so that's really nice because the office does not. Anyway, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I wish you happy knitting on your socks. And we hope to see you back again in August for our next sock. The Dandelion sock has just got its pre-order for the pattern up and published. And there is a discount available on that right now. If you're watching this video later on in time, you never know. Email us. We might be willing to do something for you. I will tell you this now. Yeah, I'll do something for you.
Twist
anyway, have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks again.
Yeah, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.